This episode of The Minimalists is brought to you by nobody, because
advertisements suck.
The Minimalists.
Hello everybody, welcome to The Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and together we are the Minimalists.
We're here with the second and a half minimalist here.
Yes.
Jess Ness Williams is in the house. Jessica Lynn Williams. Jess.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is weird.
Thanks for being had.
You know, today we're going to talk about how the minimalists apply minimalism to social media. We're going to talk about how we've changed our opinion about social media over the years, especially recently. And we're going to review the new Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. And that's why we have Jessica here today. Jess manages all of our social media accounts for the Minimalists. I think we were just talking the other day, Jess. It's been, 5 years now? To be 6 soon?
We started working together in June 2015.
Wow. We've known each other much longer than that.
Since 2012.
Wow.
But 2013, actually, I want to say, yeah.
And so I don't want this to be a diatribe against social media, although I think parts of it might feel that way today. Because I think we met on social media,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Ryan and Sean are the only people I haven't met on social media, I think. And so I'm pro social media in many respects, but I'm also anti the way it's being used, the way that we're using it, but also the way that it is using us now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote this question down early on: is social media the original social distancing? We've sort of been talking about this concept of distancing each other, but I feel like in a way, social media has connected us. It connected us, but it also puts us at an arm's length from everyone at some point. You know, Facebook friends are a good example of this. Your average person has, 500, 600 Facebook friends. Well, Dunbar's number is 150. We can only manage 150 relationships at any one given time. And so, Jess, I'm wondering what, as we're talking through some of these questions, we've got some audience questions as well. What are, I'm going to be interested in your perspective, what you're seeing, because you're closer to this than I am right now. But I think we have probably similar opinions about a lot of this stuff. So I want to talk about where we are right now in 2020, 2021, where we're going to be in the near future, and also where we've been. As you know, when Ryan and I first started the Minimalists, 2008 is when we first discovered minimalism, 2009, right around there. The Minimalists started in 2010, so 10 years ago right now. We were facing this problem. It was post-crash, this economic crisis, and a lot of people were realizing they had debt. And where'd that debt come from? It came from overconsumption, overindulgent overconsumption. And so that was a problem. And minimalism was an old answer to a new problem that was peeking its head out. And I don't think that problem has gone away necessarily. I think it's morphed. We have fewer shopping malls and much more online shopping now. So consumption and overconsumption, consumerism is still a problem. But there's a new problem that I think has emerged over the course of the last decade, during the teens. And that problem is distraction. It's not to say that we weren't distracted before. I think we're more distracted than we've ever been. And I've been thinking about this because in that documentary, The Social Dilemma, which we'll be discussing here in a moment, that Tristan Thomas is a Cleveland Cavalier, I believe. But Tristan Harris, he is a former ethicist at Google. I'm a fan of his work. I've been following it for several years now. He says this isn't like the TV. It's different from the television. And I agree with that to a certain extent, but I don't know that I completely agree with that. I think that the television at one point was pacifying the average American, average Westerner for 8 hours a day, maybe more. And now we've just replaced that with a different pacifier, right? And maybe it's a more pernicious pacifier, but the thing we were doing before sort of lacked meaning in a way, distracted us from that which is meaningful. And this is doing so just much more effectively. And I think the key problem with either one of those is we're distracting ourselves. And I think that's really where the problem is. I don't know that social media is a problem. In fact, I would say the problem isn't social media. This is my opinion. I think the problem is constant availability. And what I mean by that is when you left your house 20 years ago, you didn't have the TV following you outside the house. But now you sort of do. Whether it's the notifications or just the constant sort of panic that you feel if you're untethered from that smartphone. There's someone at Google who called it the 79th organ. Mm-hmm. And it very much feels like it's hard to become untethered to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Actually, you were reminding me the other day, it was Saturday, and usually I try and stay away. This week I made an exception because I was driving for the week to come up here, so some of my work had shifted to be later in the week, but still in the morning I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a walk in Griffith Park. I'm going to take my dog. Haven't done that in years. Used to live out here, so I really wanted to relive that. And I got into the parking garage. I didn't have my phone. And I'm like, well, I know LA pretty well, like the back of my hand, because I drove around, so I know I can get to Griffith Park. And I got lost in Griffith Park. And I was running late. Mariah and I were supposed to do yoga, and I was so upset that I wasn't on time for that. And it's one of those things where I saw, of course, like there's this utility to this tool, mm-hmm. and of course there's value in it, but at the same time, God forbid if like I ran into a mountain lion or a person that didn't have the best intentions, like these tools serve us, and they do distract us at the same time. And I think what we really need to find is, can we get a net positive? So like, am I actually getting something that's going to benefit my life out of this at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Ryan.
Yeah. Thank you. That's my famous saying at the end of the day. So I got two thoughts going on. One, I wanted to talk about the TV versus social media. I think this is really important to talk about. But I think first, let's talk about the tool. That's something that really stood out with me in the social dilemma. I think it was Tristan who said, we look at this thing like it's a tool, but a tool sits around.
Right. And
it waits patiently for you to use it.
Yeah.
Where social media is constantly demanding something from you.
Yeah.
So it's not that it still can't be used as a tool.
Bingo.
But I think that sometimes we make an excuse. Oh, well, it's just a tool that we use.
Yeah.
But the question is are we using it or is it using us?
Yeah, I think here's what I'm speaking to myself here when I say you. I want you to be clear about that. If you have social media on your phone, you're being played. It's that simple.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I know we're going to talk about some strategies and some nuances, but there are two things that I want you to get out of this episode if you stop it right after this. Number one, take all social media off your phone if you can. And if you can't, take all personal social media off your phone. I'll make that distinction. There are business reasons. We can get in that probably during the Maximal episode. We'll talk about whether or not social media is actually beneficial for business and how it might be, how it might not be as well. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is what our friend Cal Newport calls the foyer rule. So, or the foyer if you live in a nice palatial estate. I don't have either. I have a very tiny hallway when you walk into my apartment. I have a junk drawer, though. As soon as you walk in, it's in my kitchen, which is attached to that hallway there. And that's where I keep my phone. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not that I never use my phone when I'm at home. I certainly do. But when I do want to use it, I go and grab the phone out of the junk drawer.
There's a little friction.
Yeah, creating that friction. And even then, I don't have social media apps on my phone. I also don't have email on my phone. That's a choice. And then what's happening? I'm turning it back into the tool that it was intended to be.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs was in the social dilemma very briefly.
Yeah.
And he certainly didn't intend for this to be what it is today, a distraction machine that is with you in perpetuity. He was trying to merge a Palm Pilot with a iPod with a flip phone, basically, so that you had all of this and you had a little mini computer in your pocket. The intention was never to curate your attention, to cultivate your attention as many hours as possible in order to sell you advertisements.
Yeah. He likened it to like a bicycle for your mind or something.
Yeah,
right.
It kind of reminds me, it makes me think about like when we're talking about this being a tool and we think about what actually is coming from this experience of using this tool, I feel like it reminds me of like having an Amazon Echo that tells you you're not good enough. You know, like it's like a tool that like kind of assaults you. It, like in the middle of the day, like it kind of has an impact on your mind that you wouldn't necessarily expect versus like a hammer. Like if you don't touch it, nothing really happens. Like, it just sits on a table. But like social media is like a hammer that comes up and hits you in the face.
Yeah.
Like, if you respond to it in the way that it's designed for you to respond to it.
Well, let's talk about that tool, because I think that a smartphone can be a tool, and it can also be a bludgeon in a way, where it becomes a hammer that grows legs and chases you around the place, right? And you're like, and so I think that the TV was never much of a tool, right? And so we recognized it. There's even euphemisms for the boob tube or whatever, right? Like we recognized that, like, that's where I'm going to go veg out. We even use this terminology, like I'm a vegetable standing in front of this. Like I'm not an animate life form.
Now we veg out at a red light.
Exactly.
Now we veg out in a waiting room. Yeah.
Right. We've removed these interstitial zones, the waiting rooms, the red lights, the walks that we would take without the earbuds in or whatever, where we would have time. We'd make time for boredom. We'd make time for ourselves. We'd make time to be alone with our thoughts, to sort of, remember with old PCs, you would defrag them. Do you remember this?
Yes.
Yeah, and so like you have to run like a defragging sequence on a computer in order to like keep it running smoothly. Right. And I feel like that's where those interstitial zones, that's what they gave us, was a sort of defragging moment at the red light, at the airport lobby, where you didn't have access to constant contact, and therefore people couldn't constantly contact you. I mean, now if I have social media on my phone, and even if I don't have the notifications turned on, there's the pull to say, did someone at me? Did someone like my tweet? How many retweets did I get? How many shares? Whatever it is on Facebook. Like there are all of these sort of metrics that we're chasing, and we're chasing the wrong thing. I mean, I think that's the craving. The Buddhists call it the four truths, but one of them is craving, and I think that is more pronounced than ever. Jess, talk to me about The Social Dilemma. When you watch this film, what were your initial thoughts? I mean, for me, the first thing I thought was like, well, yeah, I kind of know a lot of this stuff, but I also thought they did it. I thought the documentary itself was really well done. And I've got some criticisms about the documentary I'm going to share on the Maximal episode, at least 3 big criticisms. But overall, I thought it was way better done than I anticipated.
I thought it was amazing. I loved it. I felt like I was telling Ryan, like these are like kindred spirits. Like these people, they seem like in a lot of ways are people, because they're seeing the result of the thing that they've created. And what I really like about it too is these are the creators of it, and they're not so attached to it that they can't look at it with a critical eye and say that something that they have contributed to has actually created a negative environment in our society. And I think it takes a lot of like introspection to see that your life's work has done something so damaging. But at the same time, I also think that we have a lot of good potential to bring some good into the world. And I think that it was really beautiful that it ended on a hopeful note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't believe how emotional that movie made me.
It made me cry.
Wow. I felt the exact opposite. In fact, if I had a fourth criticism, it would be that like it actually missed the emotion for me. Like
interesting.
I'll give you an example, and I know this is a self-serving example. But if you look at our first documentary, Minimalism, like to me, it emoted a sort of. It put me in an emotional place where it was like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this emotion now? Like, and then it also gave some sort of action there, and I think there were some sort of definitive things that the film said during the sort of credits at the end of the film. You can try a few things, but it didn't really give us a viable solution.
Yeah,
and I think what I want to do with this podcast is I want to provide the solution, because I think they set up the problem phenomenally well.
Yeah.
And I thought the reenactments, they did a great job with those. I thought those could have been really cheesy, but they did a phenomenal job with that.
Yeah.
And also the experts, including Tristan, I mean, they know what they're talking about. In fact, Jess, you mentioned like it is sort of a noble thing and really a difficult thing to say, hey, look, my life's work was misguided, right? Ryan and I realized that around age 30, where we had climbed the corporate ladder and realized the ladder was leaned against the wrong building. And I think a lot of these guys in the film, and a few gals, but it was almost exclusively men, who had developed these products to garner our attention. They realized at some point in their life, like, oh, this is not what we intended. And it wasn't like there was some evil cabal that got together and said, how can we drain everyone's attention? No, it was the opposite. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And the guy who invents the like button all of a sudden didn't realize the implications of having that in front of 2.5 billion people.
What was crazy to me is like they never blamed any one person. Like it was, and they asked that question, whose fault is this? What's going on? And the problem is that there's so many facets of it that create the problem.
Can we talk about that problem?
Yeah.
So I like that at the beginning. Remember they said, what is the problem? And at first they kind of had trouble explaining it.
That was so good. I loved that. I loved the hesitancy in it because it really shows like they're thick in it and they can't even answer that question definitively.
Yeah. Which is sad to me. I think that it is a rather complex problem. Let me simplify it. I think there are 3 things. I love to walk through them. And there's more than 3 things, but there are at least 3 things that I can identify as the problem right now. We already talked about one. In our new book, Love People Use Things, I call it weapons of mass distraction, right? That's really what it is. The TV distracted us when we were at home, but now it's the constant distraction. We've already talked about that. But what does it distract us from? Because if we're getting joy and meaning and purpose from these things, then it wouldn't really be a distraction, right? It's actually distracting us from living meaningfully. And so if we're not living a meaningful life, but we're doing this thing that sort of apes the form of connection, so it makes us almost feel like we're doing something meaningful in the moment. That's a problem. Second problem is, we talked about it briefly, but it prevents us from engaging with and appreciating our boredom. Because boredom actually isn't a thing. I don't think. I think it's a reaction to overstimulus.
Yes.
And
when you're overstimulated, boredom is like it's the most uncomfortable feeling.
Well, also, we're both Enneagram 7s, so I think that we probably experience that a little differently.
Right, probably.
Sorry, but anyways.
No, but I mean, you're absolutely right. We do experience that differently.
Well, I think that Rob Bell, in his book, How to Be Here, he talks about if you're bored, you're boring, right? And I think that for me, what that really means, like, 'cause you can look at a monk who's been in a room for 12 hours and he or she is not bored.
Right.
They've formed a détente with, in fact, some of them can be elated, joyous, content at least, right?
Yeah.
Beyond pleasurable, beyond happy.
I mean, that's your dream.
I mean, the weird thing is it's not. And in fact, I think I wish it was. That's actually the problem. I wish it was my dream in a way. But right now, I think a lot of our dreams are misguided. Remember Shia LaBeouf? Don't let your dreams be dreams. Just do like this fake motivational speech for a role, but I think that right now the dream for me and Ryan, I believe, is not to remove ourselves from the contemporary world like a monk or an ascetic would. There's a lot of value in that, but what we're trying to do is show that we can live more deliberately in that modern world, right? The third problem that I identified, so we got weapons of mass distraction, we've got not appreciating boredom, and the third is, I think this is the biggest problem, the advertising model. And they did a good job of highlighting the advertising model. I thought one thing was missing though. The advertising model is there to make you do one thing. It's not just to garner your attention. It's the garnering your attention is so they can feed you ads. The point of the ads is to get you to buy stuff you don't need.
Right.
With money you don't have.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the implicit message of that, but I think it gets lost in all of the bits of social media distraction. Ultimately, the point of ads, and thus the point of social media, because it's ad driven, is to get you to buy things you don't need. So how do they do that? They make you, as Jess alluded to earlier, they make you feel inadequate in a way.
Yeah. Sorry, keep on going.
Well,
No, I would love to talk about the TV versus the smartphone. But what I'll say about the ads, that could be its own documentary. That could have been its whole other thing. The emotional response that it gave me, by the way, because what you related to was there was no emotion, there was no solution to the problem, which I get that. For me, it made me sad for, well, the fictional family that was there, but the fact that they represent a real family, and it represents to me what a lot of people are going through right now with these distractions, and how it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but it actually is it is a big deal. But let's talk about, just real quick, the TV versus a smartphone. So you said you did not agree with the point, or you weren't sure if you agreed with what point?
Well, what I brought up was that the main way that it is different from the TV is I never really saw the TV as a tool.
Oh, right.
And
yeah.
And I do see the potential for a tool. Don't get me wrong.
I see what you're saying.
There is some potential as a TV being a tool.
Yeah.
But really, I don't think in our lifetimes it's ever served as an actual tool.
Yeah.
It has served as a pacifier,
Total
as
pacifier.
a distraction. The phone itself is in many ways a tool, a GPS tool. It plays music. It allows me to connect with people on the phone or via text message. And so in many ways it is a tool, but then it's also a distraction machine as well.
Yes.
One thing that's really interesting too, I feel like when you're looking at the phone, or even when I see people looking at the phone, I really try and not cast any judgment. Because what's really interesting about the phone is when you're looking at it, you could be looking at flight information, you could be looking at a calculator, you could be looking at your stocks, you could be looking at banking. And I'm not saying that it's not pernicious and not invading our lives, but I try and really look at it objectively and see that this item that I'm holding in my hand is not really serving just one purpose.
Right.
So because of that, we kind of see everybody in this zombified state, but it's interesting because from our own perspective, we're doing something of value. So I think the importance is for us to recognize that we may think we're doing something of value, but we have to be mindful of the fact that despite the fact that, like, you know, we have these algorithms, like, we can't outsmart them, because I don't think that the algorithm is about being intelligent. Like, I don't think that overcoming it is about being intelligent. I think it's it's taking advantage of our humanity. So we just have to be aware that we're humans.
Yeah. I like that point. It's like if I see someone texting, and I might be like, oh, they're there on their phone, they might be writing a poem. I mean, it's I like that, giving people the benefit of the doubt.
And even then it's contextual, right? Because
Absolutely.
like if you started writing a poem right now as we're having this conversation,
Right.
it would be a distraction.
But isn't it interesting, if I was doing this over here with a pen and paper versus having my phone out, it elicits two. I could be doing the same exact thing, but it elicits two completely different responses.
Although I think that's generational. I think that's beginning to change. We're seeing a lot of Gen Z kids. I guess Ella, my daughter, is on the tail end of Gen Z, right? Anyone born 1996 or after, and I think they're probably going to start seeing it a little bit differently with respect. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing,
right?
It's just that they're looking at it a little bit differently.
Yeah. There was a point in the documentary, going back to the TV thing, there's a point in the documentary where I think it was Tristan who was talking about the leveling up, the level that this does, and someone was debating with him, and he said, well, that's what they said about TV when it first came out. You know, that's what they said about X, Y, and Z, and this is just another version of that. Yeah. The difference to me, though, is why it's so incredibly different than what television does. Is it is there to specifically take up as much as your time as possible. Like it is a pernicious thing. And it's funny because we sit here and we blame social media, and it is a large problem, but even apps we have on our phone, it's still collecting data. It's still getting as much as it can from you to make sure that, you know, whatever search engine you use is going to like know what to sell you.
I don't think that's a different problem from TV though. In fact, if you look at the data, we spend about as much time now on our phones and TV as we did on our phones and TV 20 years ago.
Right.
It's
and
just
that
shifted in a different direction.
In that sense, you're absolutely right. The difference to me is that TV did not have the effect on your life that social media and that a cell phone has on your life.
Yes, in terms of it did. It's just probably not as pronounced, right? But here's what I mean.
You didn't watch the TV and want to cut yourself. You didn't watch the TV and be like, oh man, like look at that person's life. I'm gonna kill myself. The TV didn't bully you.
Yeah, no, I think it did to many. I think it gave us an unreasonable expectation, especially through advertisements.
Yeah, I mean, we can say. I mean, I'm happy to agree to disagree, but I mean, we can say it's similar in that aspect.
Well, I don't think we disagree though.
Oh, okay.
Well, maybe we do, but like you would agree that advertising in the 80s still tried to create a false need.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to say, and maybe we can agree on this point. We can say that social or just cell phones in general, everything that comes with it, smartphones, they are similar to televisions, but like TV is not similar to a smartphone, if that makes any sense, because it does so much more than what a TV did.
For sure.
Yeah.
Jess, you want to expand on that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one thing I just wanted to say, too, is I think even though obviously watching TV is not necessarily like a communal thing all the time, I think also in the home, number one, a lot of times, like I know we just had kind of like maybe one or two TVs. So it was more communal. It was a shared screen, number one. So I think it was communal in the sense that it was in the home, but it was also communal in the sense that there was only there weren't as many options in terms of things you could watch. So what we did is we all entered the same world during a certain time. And now when we look at our phones, because the algorithms are different for you and me, we're entering different worlds when we enter our phones. And I think that that's adding to that level of isolation that you've been talking about.
Yeah. In fact, I want to play devil's advocate against that, because I think we agree on this, but also I think there's a lot of good that comes out of these algorithms. So I'm going to write this down so we can talk about it on the Maximal. We do need to move on to some of these questions we have from the audience. Brian in China has a question for us.
I left the U.S. because of the constant pressures of societal normality, religious views, and people always crossing boundaries that you've set as if it's a joke or you're wrong. My question is, how do you deal with the constant judging or breaking of boundaries you set without being almost too aggressive?
So, Jess, I think this was a necessary question here, because Brian sort of opted out of, I don't know, Western culture, I suppose. He and his wife, I know you don't hear the entire voicemail, but he and his wife are living in China, sort of digital nomads. I'll be honest, I don't really know what that means, so maybe you can enlighten the listenership on what a digital nomad is. I've heard the term a million times, and I sort of smile and nod like I know what they're talking about. But the problem he had, it sounds to me, he didn't use this word, but tribalism, the binary, you're on team red or team blue, team R, team D, and there are 100 different examples of this. Team conspiracy or team, I don't know, round earther or whatever. Like all of these teams, and he wanted to opt out of that. But I also think that's sort of part of our human nature. So can we talk a bit about boundaries and boundaries that maybe you set up during with social media, and what would you tell Brian?
Well, I think one thing that I would tell Brian is, I mean, when we're thinking about social media becoming a distraction, I think that what we're also not thinking about is the overarching value of our life. Because when we talk about minimalism, we're always looking for the why. And I feel like when you're deriving a lot of value from your life, those distractions become less enticing because you realize what it's pulling you away from. So I feel like really placing emphasis on those things that you value so much and focusing on what your mission is in life, I think that that's one of the first things that I would say that he needs to do. If he may have already done that, but that will give you the leverage, as we talk about, to move forward effectively. So when you do hit a distraction, you know why it's important to walk away from it. Yeah.
I wish I had more information on the boundaries that he's talking about. I'm assuming it's boundaries with friends and family. And
yeah. I mean, it sounds to me like, and Jess, by the way, I think you bring up a great point. If you're living an incredible, meaningful life, these sort of mundane distractions, even though you get that dopamine rush, it's going to seem so weak in comparison to the strength of a meaningful life. Of course, that does require a lot more cerebration than celebration, is often what I'll say. We have to build up the strength of a well-lived life, and constantly pacifying ourselves or distracting ourselves with the device is not a way to do that. In fact, that's how we atrophy, I think, in many ways. Ryan, to talk about the boundaries, though, he's talking about, sometimes it might feel harsh. And guess what? It probably does, Brian. You picked up and moved to China. That's to some people, that's going to feel harsh as well. Yeah. A few things that I would say, and Jess knows I'm going to give this answer, but you don't have to explain yourself to anyone. And as soon as you start to feel like you're compelled to explain yourself, remember you can step back and say, this isn't a requirement. There may be times where I want to, but I don't need to be compelled to explain myself. I don't have to tell you why I am or I'm not using Facebook, or why I am or I'm not using Instagram or whatever. And the other thing I'm going to tell you is, guess what? Most people probably don't actually care. Ryan, you don't have a Facebook account. I'm sure people aren't coming to you and saying, how dare you?
No. But when someone does come to me and they say, how dare you, with whatever boundary I set up, which happens every once in a while. Sure. I try to, and I've said this many times on the podcast before, I try to approach those tense situations with a de-escalating attitude. And the way that you do that is you focus on showing that person love. You focus on showing that person some compassion or empathy or whatever you want to call it. You want to show that person that you respect them. That's what we want out of every relationship, every human interaction. We want to feel good. We want to be loved. We want to be understood, and we want to be respected. So if you can keep those things in mind when you're talking about these boundaries with other people, they're also probably going to de-escalate. Now, there are situations where people don't de-escalate and they just want to continue to escalate. Well, that's where you walk away. Give it a little time and then come back to it, maybe.
Now, Jess, social media is the place where people escalate all the time. And
I'm so glad we have you to de-escalate things.
Yeah, please be nice in the YouTube comments. I'm monitoring these.
So let's talk about this, because people often escalate much more quickly there. It's like if Ryan, I loved his example there. People want love and support, but on social media, it's like, well, I'm just going to pull out my switchblade. It's the equivalent of that, right? Yeah. And so, I mean, I guess, why do we do that? What are your thoughts? Because you see it so much.
I think it's a precarious situation because everyone's at the table. There's somebody in Mumbai from the table. There is a woman who picks rice in China. There's somebody in Russia at the table, and we have to be thoughtful of everybody's feelings that we don't even know what their backgrounds are. Sure. That's so hard. If somebody was in the room and I know they had a situation that I should be sensitive about, I would be aware of it. But since everybody's in the room, we have to be thoughtful of that. But really what it comes down to is we are a product of our experiences. And the more experiences we have, the more broad of people that we become. And I think when you become an open-minded person and you realize that everyone's coming to you with their resources and their tools and their experiences, you realize there's a reason that they are the way they are. And they may have something in their past that you don't know about, that if you had that same experience, you would feel the same way. So I think we really have to recognize that things are the way they are for a reason, and you might not know that reason. And if you did, you might even change your mind.
Well, that's what's great about feedback. Or I think in the documentary, they say criticism specifically.
Now Jaron Lanier, he wrote a great book about 10 reasons you should quit social media.
And we could differentiate between criticism and feedback, but sometimes feedback can have some criticism in it that isn't so sharp. It's not with a blade. But long story short is, when we get those experiences, when people point things out, it actually helps us present a better argument. Yeah.
Now, what I love what Jessica's saying here, because it sounds to me like what you're describing is compassion. And having compassion, even for those who are, we call them seagulls, right? Because Sean put a link to that essay about seagulls, but we'll put it in the show notes. But seagulls fly over whatever you've done. They crap on it, they fly away. That's what a seagull does. And we can even have compassion for them. Now, we'll still block you. But in fact, I think blocking someone is often the most compassionate thing you can do, because you're not allowing them to continue their suffering in your home, right? Or in your place of communication,
I
in
love
your
that.
community.
It's like someone came into your house and they're being belligerent.
You're self-harming.
Yes. And you are basically saying, you're not you need to leave the house.
Yes.
You're not welcome in my home.
It reminds me, I think Louis C.K. was on Fallon maybe, and he was talking about the way that people experience social media and the difference between that and real life interactions. And if I say something mean to you and I look at your face and I see your micro expressions and I realize that I was just a jerk, like, then that changes things. And I think that because of the fact that we don't have that in-person, like, visceral response to these negative interactions, the block is the closest thing that we have to it. Because when you go to that page, you have this visceral reaction of, like, the electronic version of a frown saying, like, you made me feel bad and now you're not allowed to talk to me anymore. And I think it's a beautiful boundary to draw. I love it. One time I was going to block somebody and I sent Josh Blocks a picture of blocks. I'm like, we're going to have a block party today. I think we may have posted the organizing is well-planned hoarding essay that day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, some people get very mad by what I always look at as some very sort of innocuous words, and then
what I find people get really angry about these exceptions, and they think that we're not allowing exceptions for anything, and it's like, well, there's always no matter what philosophy you look at, like, there's going to be an exception to the rules that are laid out.
I'm sorry, I just want to mention that I also don't block everybody that's a jerk, because sometimes I think it's valuable to make sure that there's a conversation to be had, because if somebody else notices that they're a jerk and they're like, hey, I'm going to point out to you that you were a jerk.
Right.
Like, so I think that it's important to, leave those conversations be, because it creates a dialogue, and that person needs that dialogue.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You know what? You just gave me an idea. I would love to take, like, the most visceral conversation that we can find on the internet, and then the skit is everyone in the same room talking to each other.
Yeah.
Like reading reading the comments back and forth to each other like that, because you would never do that if you were in the same room with someone.
Well, and it would be even better if you hire, like, well-known actors to act it out.
Oh, yeah.
And they're acting out these comments to each other, typos and all.
Oh, it'd be so good.
Yeah, so this would be really good.
Patent pending.
Brian, I'm going to send you a copy of the Minimalist Rulebook. You're asking about boundaries. Well, one way to define a boundary is to call them rules, right? Ryan and I came up with 16 rules for living with less. It's a free ebook. You can get it at theminimalists.com/resources. There's also an audiobook version of that available now as well. Ryan and I recorded it. We even did a mini podcast associated with each of the 16 rules. So you can check out the free ebook version or the audiobook version, theminimalists.com/rulebook for the audiobook version, and you can download the free ebook there as well. I'm going to skip Anna's question. Actually, we'll move it over to the maximal episode because I thought it was a good question. We're just running out of time here. So Ryan, tell me what time it is.
You know what time it is. It is time for our lightning round where we yes, thank you, Jess. Where we answer your questions from your texts. You can text your questions and comments to 937-202-4654.
Yes, indeed. Those texts go to both of our phones. We personally reply to as many as we can, but we don't respond to everyone. We do respond to some on this podcast, though. During the lightning round, this is where Ryan and I, and now Jess, we all do our best to answer every question with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We put the text to these minimal maxims in the show notes so you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you like. And now, thanks to Jessica, you can find all of our minimal maxims in one place, minimalmaxims.com. Megan has a question for us.
All right. Megan wants to know, how do you balance staying informed with spending time in the moment? Is there a secret algorithm to seeing only the highlights and the funny stuff?
So Jess, I did try to separate this a little bit earlier, but like you have personal accounts as well. You're at Jess Breathes on all the relevant social media platforms, MySpace and Tumblr, wherever else she is.
Yik yak.
So let's talk about balance, right? Because you do have social media accounts on your phone out of necessity here. But how do you find balance?
Screenless Saturdays.
Yeah.
I find balance because what I'm looking for with Screenless Saturdays, what is it? It is the space between stimuli and response. And I have a full 24 hours every single week to have a deeper relationship with that space and recognize the value in it, but also confront myself, because I feel like that's really what we're looking to do here, is confront ourselves. And we're looking for, like, why am I searching for the phone? And I think that so often we search for it, but then we're not really paying attention to the fact that there's something that's deeper going on. So I really feel that the value is looking inward and stopping for a moment and placing up those boundaries, parenting yourself. I gestured at you because last night you were like, I'm getting riled up. I gotta go to bed. I gotta wind down.
Oh yeah,
and
that's right.
The value of parenting yourself and looking at yourself, because really, like, you know, children, when I see a child crying in the store, I can, like, relate. I'm like, I kind of look at them and I'm like, yeah, you know what? I kind of feel that way sometimes. So I think that we all have, like, that person inside of us. So I think if we recognize that and we're aware of the fact that that person is inside of us, then we can both be compassionate for ourselves and draw effective boundaries.
Yeah.
I guess something pithy for you, and maybe we can talk about it just briefly here, but when she's asking how do you balance staying informed with spending time in the moment, is there a secret algorithm to only the highlights and the funny stuff?
Find out on our Maximal episode what that secret algorithm is.
So here's my pithy answer. When everything's important, nothing's important. And what I mean by that is, we call it a Twitter stream for a reason, or a social media stream, right? Imagine trying to consume every drop of water in a river. Or imagine just trying to touch every drop of water in a river. You can't. Now, someone like me who has OCD, I'm a completist. I try to catch up on things, but I've also surrendered. And so I think the word we're looking for here is surrender. I think we have to surrender to the fact that we're missing out, and it's okay. In fact, the fear of missing out is the problem, not the missing out. The missing out is not a problem at all. Miss out, but miss out on the right things so you don't miss out on the things that are actually important.
Yeah. My pithy answer is this: there is no secret algorithm for discipline. And I wish it was as simple as, you know, downloading an app. And although an app called Discipline sounds like there's something there.
Neuralink.
Patent pending. But yeah, these are things that we have in our lives. And in the Social Dilemma, it talks about how this technology is, you know, growing way faster than the way we're able to evolve. In fact, we haven't evolved at all since this technology. So we have to come up with ways to handle this technology ourselves, and it takes a lot of discipline.
Yeah. Yes, it does. All right, well, we've got some listener tips, some really great listener tips today. Also, an added value segment you don't want to miss out on, but you don't want to have fear of missing out. You can miss out on it if you want, right? Yeah. But we do have a bunch more surprise questions this week. Here are some of them. What are 2 things you can do right now to improve your relationship with your smartphone? Do smartphones make us dumb? We've got an article about that. Also, what's the best way to ditch your smartphone if that's something you're trying to do? What are the 3 biggest problems with the documentary The Social Dilemma? How do you build a screen time budget? And what's the best digital declutter experiment? What are the consequences of Ryan unfollowing everyone on social media?
Ooh, I can't wait to answer that one.
If you had to use only one social media platform, what should it be? I'm going to be talking to Jess about that. Also, is social media essential to run a business?
That's a good one, too.
Plus a million more questions for Jessica and The Minimalists. And if you want to hear all that, subscribe to our Maximal episodes on the Minimalist Private Podcast. It's a completely separate podcast, and it's the most honest way for The Minimalists to earn an income, because we don't believe in ads. By the way, if you're not a private podcast subscriber, you're literally missing out on 2/3 of what we create. So just be aware of that. You can try it out just for a week or a few weeks or a month. What we're trying to do is add immense value to your life. In fact, I have a quote here from a new Patreon supporter. She says, "Oh my God," I just pasted this in from Patreon. "Oh my God, these episodes absolutely blew my mind. I just had to pause and come here to write this comment. This private episode is altogether on a different level compared to the public one. Great work."
I love it.
The reason being is, and Jess, tell me about this. Our Maximal episodes, Ryan and I know they're different, but how are they different to you?
I think they're different to me in the sense that you seem like you can be more free there. And I think obviously if you have somebody that's paying for your work, I think that if you look at it, that's really the issue with social media is there. I think if we had advertisers, then our audience would be the product.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really when we're talking about the fact that advertisements suck and we don't have advertisements on the podcast, that's why, is because we want to be the one group of individuals that say you are not a product, that you are something more than that.
Yeah. And by the way, what we have to do is continue to add value to you. And the places that advertise don't have to necessarily add value. They just need to get your eyeballs onto their service because you are the product, as you alluded to. So head on over to theminimalists.com/support to subscribe and get your personal link so that our private podcast plays in your favorite podcast app. Ryan, what else you got for us this week?
Here are some voicemail comments and tips from our listeners. Check them out.
Hi there. My name is Amy. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I just wanted to mention something that helps me with social media, with Facebook. And I would love to eliminate Facebook, just like you've talked about on your podcast, and would love to eliminate it, but I still have to keep it because I use it for work purposes. I teach classes to kids, and I communicate with the parents through Facebook. I talk about new classes, etc. So I'm keeping Facebook, but I can't stand the news feed. It's very distracting and annoying. So what I've done to help me is I have downloaded a newsfeed eradicator, and I've done that for my phone and my computer. And you can find different newsfeed eradicators if you do a search online. I use Feedless. I use Feedless for my phone. And basically what happens is you go onto Facebook and the whole news feed, just the news feed, is eliminated. And sometimes these news feed eradicators also have a little quote for the day instead of the news feed. So, and it's just so much more helpful. If I need to look up and see what somebody's doing, I can do that. I can just manually do that through Facebook, but it doesn't have all of that annoying newsfeed.
Hi, Josh and Ryan. My name is Hope, and I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. I'm calling in regards to your recent podcast episode about book clutter. Almost any time that you mention your books, you encourage your readers to minimize them once they are done with them. I want to suggest a fun way to do that. In Louisville, I've seen several book exchange boxes in different coffee shops where you can leave old books you've finished and pick up a new one without having to go to the library. If you're a minimalist but don't want your friends and family to feel like you're trying to convert them, maybe consider leaving one of Josh and Ryan's books in an exchange box instead. This way you can rest assured that the next recipient of the book is someone who is choosing to learn about minimalism for themselves. If your city doesn't have book exchange boxes, maybe you can bring this concept to it.
All right, y'all. Thanks again to Jessica Lynn Williams.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
It was awesome.
You can check her out on social media. We'll put a link to her handles in the show notes if you'd like. Our added value this week. We've been talking a little bit about self-destructive behavior, and social media, I think, contributes to some accidental self-destructive behavior. In fact, I think most of the time, think about your 20s, Ryan, or my 20s.
I barely remember my 20s.
Exactly. And so remember, though, that when you start a self-destructive behavior, it never feels self-destructive at first.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It feels like escape or getaway or whatever. And before we know it, all of a sudden, we're steeped in self-destruction. There's a new album out by MGK, and it's called Tickets to My Downfall, and he's this 29-year-old, I guess you would just call him like a rapper from Ohio, but he started, he made this, what I would call a 90s alternative rock album, which seems like a strange combination. It seems like a rapper couldn't do that, but he did it exceptionally well.
Is this the album you sent me?
Yeah, it is.
Sweet.
I don't know if you checked it out yet, but my favorite song is there's a ton of great songs on there, but it is an album. He's a 29-year-old guy who is. Yeah, I wrote a novel a decade and a half ago called As the Decade Fades, and I finished it when I was 29, and a lot of it was about sort of self-destructive behavior, right? And I see a lot of those same characteristics in MGK and what he's writing about and how he can't get out of his own way. And I see the parallels right now with social media. We can't get out of our own way. And the only way for us to sort of repair ourselves is to realize that we're really screwed. I mean, someone's not going to come in and regulate you toward freedom. Now, I'm not saying regulation isn't needed with respect to social media. It is. But you can't wait around for the regulation. Self-regulation is what's important here. So if you realize you're screwed, then you also have to realize you have to save yourself. And we have this old term, vote with your dollars. But now in this attention economy, it's vote with your attention.
Yeah.
And realize that if you're giving your attention to these platforms for a disproportionate amount of time, then you're voting for their business model. And so you don't have to completely opt out, but you have to walk away for extended periods of time. Otherwise, you're going to see some self-destructive behavior. And so check out the new MGK album. It's called Tickets to My Downfall. Real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the Minimalists. Ryan had this idea over a year ago that whenever we have a guest in here, so Jess, when we're all finished with this, we can get you to do one of these as well. We have this new video series called Biggest Failure, and it's talking about each person comes on and says, hi, I'm Joshua Fields Milburn, and this is my biggest failure. And then we'd sort of talk about the lesson that we learned from failing. And Ryan, you sort of had this idea because I think I wanted to change the narrative, even the sort of social media narrative in a way of constant winning.
Yeah, I really think that in Western culture there is this narrative with celebrities or with radio personalities, with social media personalities. I'm trying not to use the word influencer here, but what they do is they talk about like, well, hey, here's where I messed up in life, and then here's how I started to win, and here is how I win tomorrow, and here's how I make sure I win from 5 years from now, and I'm going to be winning the rest of my life, and you can win with me too.
Yeah.
And there's just something about that is...
I kind of got excited.
It's a little phony. It's not real life.
Yeah.
And I think what the Biggest Failure segment does is it really takes us to the truth of some things. And to me, the truth is more important than just people constantly seeing me or seeing our guests as just constant winners.
By the way, I think these it's a video series, and by the way, it's only on our Patreon page, theminimalists.com/Patreon or patreon.com/theminimalists. Either way, we'll get you there. Every Saturday we put these out. They show up in your email inbox. No cost to you if you are a podcast supporter. But what I've noticed, Jess, is that this resonates with a lot of people because we all fail and we all have sort of bruises or scars, but I think our scars make up the most interesting parts of us. And so with this video series, it's 2 to 5 minutes each week, and it's just this little nugget of like, oh, this person failed their way to success, but because that's how everyone succeeds. By the way, we know this as a child, right? Whenever you see a kid first trying to walk, it's not like, well, I got up and fell, and so I guess I tried that once and now I'm done. But as adults, it's like, well, I just screwed that up. Let's hide that and make sure no one ever sees that screw up ever again. A kid falls and they're like, get right back up. I'm going like how long do you give a kid to walk? Well, it's until they can actually walk, right? I mean, it's not you're not going to say, well, you've tried 4 or 5 times. Like, what are you doing, Ella? Like, you're just going to be relegated to crawling for the rest of your life. No, you're going to fail until you figure this out. And that's what we're trying to capture here with this video series. It's called Biggest Failures. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. Put a link to the most recent one in there. But every Saturday they come out, show up right in your inbox. If you are a podcast supporter, patreon.com/theminimalists. You can follow The Minimalists on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Minimalists. Come to one of our live podcast shows. Visit theminimalists.com/tour to find a city near you. If you have a question, comment, or minimalism tip for our podcast, email a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. You can comment on this episode at youtube.com/theminimalists. And if you want our show notes in your inbox. Sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.com. We'll never send you spam or junk or advertisements or anything like that, but we will send you our Simple Sunday emails whenever we send those, in addition to our podcast show notes every week. And if you leave here today with just one message, we hope it's this, Jessica.
Love people and use things, because the opposite never works.
Love it. All right, y'all. See you later.
See ya.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.